So coming back into this video where we left off in the last, it's time to continue, doing all of these large number of refinements. So let's get on with that. So I will, of course, switch myself over to default linear keys. So that's what's created. And of course, when I've, set the keys in for these motions here in stepped, I have, of course, created, singular keys. So the first thing I need to do before I linearize these, ideally, is to go in and create my actual hold positions. So I'm just going to bring my timeline down so as I can focus just on this section here. And let's take a look at exactly what we're dealing with. So we've got this little anticipatory lean that he takes to his right there, which enables him to lift and move his left foot. So that left foot is landing here. I'm going to say, let's say, 8 frames, shall we say? Possibly less, since that's where his hip goes right over. Let's just key it there. So there's a little hold for that. It comes across, and then as we see, he moves it again. So I'll just put a hold there 8 frames beforehand. We then have the right foot, which lands in its new position here. So again, I'll just say 8 frames, I guess, something like that to hold it. And then, of course, it has another little step here. So once again, I'll just go for an 8 frame. Just to guess at the timing, we'll see how it works out once we linearize it. We then, of course, have the motion of the root, but also, of course, the wing IK goals here. So we'll key both of those together because at the minute, of course, they are in sync. So we want to try and maintain that as we key so as we don't get, unappealing drift taking place. So we've got a little 5 frame hold to his shift there already, so we'll keep that. And that's followed by a 6 frame step across. That might be a bit swift, but once we get into linear, we can see that and retime it if necessary. Do we need a hold in between here from coming across to the next step? Well, possibly not, because it will be a continuous movement once he starts moving to his left there. Although we probably will want an in-between, we don't need an actual hold. And then possibly, of course, the same here as he's moving across. We'll just leave that as not needing any holds. We'll see how that works out. And then, of course, we've got this frame here where he has turned his attention to look down there. Okay, so let's take all of those items that we've adjusted, the root, the 2 wing IKs, and, of course, the leg IKs. And then all of the stepped keys that exist for them. That, of course, is not including that one. So it's everything else back before then. We'll set all of those to be linear. Okay, there we go. We've now got his, initial moves taking place there. It is, of course, not completely clean and perfect. There's still some stepped stuff here on the wing IK. So let's sort those out. Yep, as you see, we still have stepped keys coming in later there, so let's linearize those. Might as well at this point. And I also had some keys that I'd used to pose his head, neck, and so on. So let's grab the 2 neck controllers that we've got there, the spine controller. Actually, there's not a lot going on at the spine at the moment, not in this section anyway. And let's just check for some holds on the head and neck as well, since we see they currently have synced keys here. Well, we have that look to the side there, so let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 perhaps, and key it off there. Then he looks over in this direction before doing a quick check back, so I'll do that as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'm also going to hold that look back as he starts to slink off. So again, here I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and put a hold there. After which all of our head and neck keys here can become linear. Now we can start to see a problem occurring there on the head. Let's just change its position because it got out of position there. So let me just put it somewhere I can see it more clearly at that frame. Also these frames here. Okay, and we see right there, there's my problem. You see the heading perform a flip, and also of course the pitch performs a flip. This is because at some point whilst posing this I would have been using something like the local or world axis, so I've got a gimbal flip take place here, an Euler flip, and so that's what's causing these weirdo rotations between those keys there. We could of course fix this manually, but a nice easy fix is going to be to turn to the animation toolbox and we can use the Euler filter here, and there we see the correction across those frames that has happened there. So let's apply that, and what we should see is that, yep, the rotations of that head item have cleaned up for us. So bit of Euler filtration there. So let's give this a good play and see how we are looking. Okay, good so far. Obviously a little clunky here and there, but that's all right. I think the pacing of the feet is pretty decently timed. I think that's about right. I definitely need a tween on that root. Specifically, I think I want to slow him down just a little bit at this point. So let me be sure to grab both the root and the wing IK controls there and just nudge them over slightly so we get a little bit of a tween there, you see. So he just slows into that and then quicks out as he pulls that other foot across. And then something similar here. Let's just nudge him back over so we've got a little slow coming out of that. And what I think I'm going to do is take the frames here for the foot landing, which you'll notice at the minute of course go with the hip there, and I'm going to set those ahead of it. So let's grab those both and just rattle them back. Let's say 3 frames. Yeah, I think that works better timing wise. Okay, what else do we see? Well, the pole items here, where I position the poles to get the wings in position, they're still step keyed. So those need to be converted, but of course I don't want them drifting, so I'm going to need a couple of hold positions for them. And really it's going to be as he starts to do this slink here. That slink is mistimed at the minute, so I'm going to work on the movement of that first and then I'll keep the poles in afterwards. So let's see that. Ah yes, there's my problem. I've just let it drift into that slink there, which I don't want. So what I'm going to do is, let's see, where will I want to hold it to? That there is a 4 frame push, so let's make this first one, let's say a 5 frame, shall we? See how that plays. So that'll be frame 107, so I'm just going to take this frame here for, again, both the root and the wing IKs, and I'm just going to create a key for those of 107 in this same pose. Okay, so that's starting to look better. Perhaps he does go a little fast into this. He should have a little more of a slink action to it, so let's try an additional 3 frames there. Ah, that's more like it. Again, can possibly use a tween just to give it a little of life, but otherwise pretty good. So we jump ahead with, again, a little bit more fast forwarding, and you can see that I've, done some of the tweening and such here. Again, it's nothing that we haven't seen, many times already. You see I've just got a few little tweens on the feet there, and a couple of tweens added in on the root to change the rate at which it moves, as well as a little bit of up-down as he goes from, feet together to feet apart and actions of that nature. Also, I wanted to put a bit of roll on the hip here, but of course doing that on the root would, be swinging the wings like this, so I'd have to be animating their IK goals in time with that, which is of course very tricky to do. And so that brings us on to something which is, again, an aspect of controls that may or may not be available on a given rig, but are on this one, and that is the hip swing item that I have here, which, as you can see, just allows me to swing the whole hip section. See, taking the legs and the rear part of the body with it like that. As such, at this stage, notice I haven't done any animation on the tail at all, but you do get a bit of a bob action going on the tail because that's coming from the hips root animation there. So that gives us a little bit of a start point on what's going to be happening with the tail. Notice as well that I've gone for, common things like overlap on the head here. The head and neck, they've got some overlap. See how it overlaps the turn of the main body. It's got a little bit of, preempt and follow through and all of that in it. And of course, as he dives off, or as he begins to dive off, he's still looking back and then brings his head around as he leaps forward like this. We can also notice, if we look in the side view here, that, again, using the hips swing item here, the hips root item, I've put a little preemptive action on him as well. So you can notice that as he goes for the leap, you see his butt does a little dip and push like that. And this, of course, will work into the legs and gives the idea of him pushing himself off like that. And again, as you can see, that overlaps slightly with the main action of the body there. You can also notice that right at the end here, I've got a couple of little keys on the wing IK goals. So you see, just as he gets ready to pinch down, you see there I've got the wings just sort of pinching themselves like that and pulling up. Again, this is an anticipatory move, as of course he's, getting himself ready to do the leap. So he's just sort of tucking his wings and getting ready to go in those last few moments before he actually jumps. So far, nothing particularly special going on. Nothing that we haven't, really sort of seen many times with many different characters and creatures. So let's take a look at how this is actually working out now then that we've got that little pace and dive action going on. We can see how well he plays back with it. So there he is and getting ready to go and off. And I think that there's a couple of things that look not particularly brilliant, mainly with his dive here. So we can see that he goes to dive and, his little thrust forward there, that little 4th frame thrust I had him do is good. But then he sort of looks to be slowing down. You see, he sort of pushes himself fast, and then as soon as he hits the air, he slows a little bit. So I think that clearly I need to work on all of that there. So what have we got? Well, here's his main route, right? And so there we go. There's the initial thrust, the push right there, and that bit looks nice. I could, of course, perhaps slow that down, but rather I think I'm going to speed everything else after up. So what I'll do is just grab all his controllers, and we're going to expand our timeline out to full here. Now what we can clearly see is I've got keyframes on things after the 116 point, so let's just make sure what they are. Or rather, let's look at the far out space where that root key would be first. So that would be there at 132. So what I think I'm really going to do is grab only 132 onwards and shift those. These few keys that are occurring in this time in between that's going to get compressed, I'm going to deal with as I need to. So let's pull our timeline out to full extension so as we've got all of our keys available. Let's grab everything there and let's shift it down. Now it shouldn't require a huge shift, so I'm just going to go 1-2 frames to start with. Let's see how that affects the speed of our act. That's better, I think. Again, we can give it a bit of a scrub. That helps us tell what the timing looks like. Come back, give it a regular playback. Yep, that's seeming better. Just going to zoom out so as I can get a slightly better view on it here. And leap, yeah, that is slightly better, but we've definitely got a change of momentum happening there. So let's think about what might actually help this somewhat. I could, of course, just, compress time back, deal with it that way. However, if we watch carefully, there's a couple of other details that aren't helping. First of all, there's the leap itself. He's just sort of dropping a bit, and yet, if we look closely, we can see that the way we've, had him keyed up, he's really doing more of a push with his legs, so I'd imagine him to be springing further out from the building. So I think that is something that I'm going to deal with, and I'll deal with it in this fashion here at 116. What I'm going to do is push him out, so he's further out this way, but from the side I'm going to bring him up a bit, so down less effectively, so he's really leaping. Oh, look at that, that already looks better. Look at that, really pushing himself off and forwards like that. So since there's a greater distance now until the next frame, not a lot, but a little, that will of course accelerate his drop slightly. What I can also do is take that frame, which is now 130, and push that out further as well to carry that forward momentum a bit. That again means he's travelled a slightly farther distance, and so of course is still sped up a little. Now that looks better. Obviously we don't want him to plummet like a rock immediately, but we do want some better sense of drop, and I think that we're getting much closer there with it. So if we look at him like this, where we've got a better view of the full drop, then we can see that that's starting to look quite reasonable there. Try it from the other side here, see what this view looks like. Yeah, that's definitely better. We definitely get a better sense of him dropping there and picking up speed as he goes. So let's just double check those keys in the graph editor, because of course one of the things that we'll be playing into this is the crossover between where we had the linear keys and the spline keys. So let's take those guys there, make those spline, and what we see is we get this sort of quite ugly, look, that ugly little hitch here. That of course is in his, lean forward to push. So what I think I'll do is bring that up in Y ever so slightly. That should be TCB spline, and I'll just work the tension on it like that. And conversely, I'll back work the tension on this next one, the 116 key, a little to give him a little bit of over the top and drop action. Now if we see it playing back, that's a little better, but now I do get a little bit of a hiccup, so perhaps this key should just come back in slightly more positive territory there. Yeah, and we can just get the little hump coming out of that one instead. As such, if we see this now, then that's definitely looking a lot smoother, a lot cleaner, and that start is got a bit more of a leap to it, and he's certainly accelerating as he goes down, which is good. Again, we can just see it here from perspective view, and that's looking good. Now, one thing I can notice that I did when I was messing around that frame timing is that I messed up something here on the wings. Yeah, there we go. Now, one thing that we can see is that perhaps it's the edits I've done, I certainly didn't see it happening before. I've created a little bit of a pig's ear there on the wings. See how they stitch in and then pop out? They've basically snapped around a bit. Of course, we have to remember that there's this whole switch system, and it is here at key 116 that I've performed my switch to lock the IK goals into the root. Follow along with that. Of course, at the minute that is still a stepped key. So what I really want to do here is to work into a bit of a blend across that. So we can see that there is this 4-frame push there from 112 to 116. I've got keyframes, of course, for the wing goals here and the root, and of course my pose at 116 is more or less as I want it to be. So what I'm going to do is to take the switch here, come back to 112, and just of course key it there at the 0 position. What I must also do is line back up this constraining match to item again. So I'm going to grab that, come and snap it over here to the IK goal parent item, zoom right on in on it, and of course just start lining it up in terms of rotation as well. This, like that, takes a little nudging just to get it round and get it as it should be. But with a little bit of careful eyeballing here, we can see that it's not too difficult to get it all lined up pretty much square like that. Now what we can do, that key here at 116, that's still going to be a stepped key. So let's make sure that all of the keys for this guy are linear. And then what we'll do, of course, is we'll take the switch item as well, get its pitch, and of course that was a stepped key. So we'll set that to be linear also. Now this will give us a bit of a mess because of course the whole set of IK goals are drifting, and so it's one of those, cheeky little crossovers that we need to tween here. If we look at the wings to start with, well, we can see that horrible pop that the wings took is gone already. That has been cleaned out simply by the action that we just took there. So it's good because the wings have begun to behave themselves. The legs, however, are a bit of a mess. So let's get in and tidy those up. We'll deal with these feet one at a time then, because that's quite frankly just going to be the easiest way. And I'll start out with this one here. So what it needs, of course, is a keyframe here at 112 to hold it. And obviously enough, it also has its keyframe here at 116. Now at the minute that's a bit wrong, so I'm going to repose that. So it's pushed back like this, so he's done this, push off. I'll bring it out like this as well, put some stretch in it. So of course he's, really kicked himself off there. Right, that looks decent enough to me. This 115, wherever that came from, I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, and we see that straight away the tween is improved. Again, this is one of those funny little crossovers, and the easiest way to deal with this is just going to be to key every single one of these 4 frames. So that one in the middle there at 114, that actually looks like it's pretty decent. Yep, it is at least not terrible. And so at 113, let's push and adjust it. Yeah, okay, I'm going to give the 114 a bit of a roll there, and also just bring it back along here a little bit so it's still more or less in its contacting point. And 15 here, we'll just sort of push it back again so it's nice and straight and stretched. Dot it down, just carefully bring it across there. Yep, that looks pretty good to me. Then I've got another key here at 118 if it's stretched out, and that works for me as well. So there you see, we get this decent little act of in-betweening across that blended crossover for the IK there on that foot. So let's come back and do the other one as well. Great, we've got a key there at 112. That's more or less how it should be at 116. Right, that's totally overextended and a bit of a mess, so let's just bring that in there. Easiest from orthographic view. Let's rotate it around. There we go, that's more like it should. Give it a bit of a twist there, some kickback like this. There we go, that's more as it should be, I think, at 116. It's doing a bit of a counter twist on the in-between there, so let's just clean that up. Wait, I see what's gone wrong here. It's simply doing a bit of an Euler flip somewhere along the line. At some point I've keyed it and that's messed it up. I've probably used the local axes. So again, let's just give that a quick Euler filter. Yeah, there we go. We see the adjustment occurring there. So let's apply that. Okay, that's better. So that's taken care of that rotation. And so in fact, I would say that with just that one in between, we're pretty good. We do get that sense of him, pushing off with his feet there, which is, I think, nice and as we would desire it to be. Obviously, it looks a little weird further down, but we can look at that in time. A minute, let's just see how that looks. Okay, that is definitely now looking a good deal better. So we've dealt quite happily with that, little overlapping action on the blended constraint there, and dealt with making the IK goals behave themselves across the blend. So that's all totally decent. We see that we've still got that wing clipping through the building there. Pointed that out earlier, obviously, but now is probably the time where we want to deal with it. And to be perfectly honest, I think that rather than changing the IK for the wing, I'm just going to use the finger controls here. So as he comes and goes into his push, let's say there at 112, somewhere here 117, let's lift all of that up. Can also twist it round a little bit like this, bring it out a touch, and there we go, we're getting clearance enough on the building there. It doesn't look weird, so that's fine. I can perhaps make an adjustment to the IK goal here. The wing is sort of out a bit there at 112, so let's fold it back in a little. I am also going to turn it up ever so slightly, just sort of twist it round a little bit like that. And at 116, yeah, that is pretty much where I want it. I can perhaps just tease it a little bit that way. It's more so that way. There we go, that works well. Now we've got a nice pass over for the wing. If we watch the action of the arm, I see that this elbow is sort of breaking. I can probably work that. There it is, there's the bad frame. It's on the in-between, so let me just work the pole vector there. No, that doesn't seem to be the problem. I suspect it's in-between on this IK goal. And yes, see, we're just pushing too far away from the body, so let's bring it back for a little in-between. I can also give it a little bit of a roll, so a little bit of a tween somewhere like that. That makes that nicer and tidier. And then I think that the 116 starts to look a little bit wrong. It certainly shifts too fast, so I'm also going to just tease him back with his wing on that frame as well. Give that a little turn here. There we are, elbows tucked up tight underneath his chest there. Okay, that carries over much more now. I think I can also adjust the pole vector there for that arm, bring it out more like this one, or that wing, whatever we want to call it here. Yeah, and that handles that move now much more cleanly. Okay, so there we go. Obviously there's still details to add, you know, little bits of subtle animation on the toes, and I'm also going to work in a foot lift here. I've already done it on the 1 foot, but I need to work the IK foot control on this right hand leg so that he actually creates a proper push off here. You see that collapsing, which I don't really want to do. I want to put some tension into the knee, so that would be somewhere around here. You see, bring that up, keeping that there until 112. By the 116 I can roll it off like this perhaps and keep it there, so that works nicely. Gives him that little flick in his foot as he goes over. So little details like this we can still of course add in. So there we go, that's our major, you know, key and groundwork laid in for this, you know, opening section of the animation here. What remains beyond this point really is just, you know, the good old spit and polish type stuff that we want to work on. And I suppose we could do that now, of course. As I've said, we see in this video that we're able to sort of dice up our workflow between, you know, different sections that we work on when we're working step, linear, spline and so on, how much detail we're putting in at any one point. We're very free in how we can do that. But for the most part, I think I'm pretty happy with where I'm at so far, and consequently what I want to start doing now before I get into the nitty-gritty of, you know, polishing all of this up is to go back and start looking at his actual flight section. So let's take an initial look at that then. So we're going to look first of all at this first bit of flight, which is the drop. And so we see that as he drops, you know, he gets his wings ready for what he's going to do. He brings his elbows up there. This will be easier if we come round and look at him from the front here. See, he does this classic sort of bird of prey pose as he comes in, preparing his wings, getting them up and ready, and there spreads them out. So he's getting ready to catch the air and actually start taking flight like this. Now, of course, as he comes to the bottom of the drop here, don't forget he does this, you know, whiz up. Of course, he actually catches and begins to give himself lift, which is what stops him slamming into the ground. So let's take a look at how I've got that keyed in so far. We see that, you know, he preps his wings, he gets them out on the drop as he sort of begins to glide like this, but then just as he comes to bottom out here, you'll notice that I've added in whoosh. There's the flap, you see. So just as he comes down, by this point, you know, the wings catching the air are beginning to break him, parachute him a little bit, and as they do so, he thrusts his wings forward, and that starts to propel him upwards. That gives him that first generation of lift. Now, the important point here is, of course, again, an issue of body mechanics. The fact that he gets lift at this point and doesn't keep dropping, the fact that he levels out, is of course to do with the fact that he's using his wings. He's flapping his wings, pushing himself through the air, and of course giving himself lift. Thus, in a way, To a flying creature, the wings are analogous to the legs of a walking creature or to the wheels of a vehicle. They are the parts in contact that are driving the body. Consequently, of course, his entire flight path is going to be determined by what he is doing with his wings. Where he flaps them, where he tucks them, how he banks and rolls them to create turn. Now, what so far we haven't done is to, work in the details of rotation as he goes along his flight path here. All of that has yet to be added. We've done the basics, of course, as we saw before, but there's still plenty of detail that needs to be added onto the root item's rotation curves. But a lot of that detail depends upon, of course, when he acts his wings, when he flaps them. The way, however, that we're going to approach this is in sort of a backwards fashion, like we saw with the Hulk example. What we are going to do first is to worry about the motion of the body, get that so as he's, swimming and banking and curving and swooping, getting in all the details of his action that he's taking first. And then once that is done, we'll work backwards into the wings and we can put the flapping in at the appropriate moments in time. So just as we saw with the Hulk, doing the body first, then the legs after, or the follow-up example where we saw the guy going from front counter to bar, moving the body through its space first, then catching the feet up after. That's the technique that we're going to use here to help us, animate this in a way that gets the sense of action, mood and whatever else that we're trying to achieve. We'll work on the body first and bring in the actuators, the wings, the wheels, whatever you want to think of them as, afterwards. So the first part in getting all of his rotations down for his flight path then basically just means coming into the root keys that we've already got here and just aligning them to his flight path. And you can see that the way that we do this is very similar to how we did the car. We basically line them up so as, he is tangential to his path, like this. The only difference, of course, is that unlike the car, because he's flying around, we do this in 3 dimensions, or 2 axes. So, of course, we look at how his pitch handle there is aligning along his motion path, but we also look at the side for the amount of rise in his body, and we get the heading handle also aligned along. As I say, this is a tangential alignment, so of course, at straight parts of the path, he's just aligned straight, flat on the path, as it were. But when you come, of course, to, bends and corners in the path like this, then of course, you notice these sat, across it like this. Essentially, so as, the distance between the path and the point of this handle there is the same on one side as the other. It's tangential. What that does, of course, is mean that he's into a full turn by the time he hits the key. So, of course, in that, whole interpolated section, he's turning ready to hit that point. And, of course, coming round to each of those points. Another good example of this lineup occurring is where he hooks over the top here, where he comes into this last key just before the dive. Then, of course, having him lined, tangentially on the path there, he's dipped forward already by that point. So, of course, as he comes over the top like that, he begins to dip down before he actually begins falling. Which, of course, means that during this part of the path, he'll be doing something like, tucking in his wings or, somehow letting go of his lift to just allow himself to take on a projectile motion and get ready to dive bomb into the park here. We also see, of course, before he does this little rise, by having him tangentially aligned at that key, he's starting to tip up already in anticipation of it. And what we're then able to do is go through and, of course, do any tweening that we might want to on this path. Of course, I'm going to use modified channels for this, because the position keys that I've already got and have TCB splined in are good. I don't want to add new in-between position keys at any point. And the main places where I'm really going to want to tween him are going to be points where he rolls into a bank like this. That's going to be the main thing I need to deal with. Somewhere perhaps here-ish at the midpoint between those frames, I might bank him just that little bit harder here So he comes into a, a swift, hard turnover like that, and have him somewhat maintain it as well, coming out of that turn. Keep him turned quite hard over. And then of course on the next frames he's starting to level out. Perhaps not so much at this point because he's still coming out of his turn, and perhaps having a little bit more level by this point here. But then as he comes here, we'll have him very quickly coming out of that roll. He's still turning in, so he's not completely flat, but he's not, banked hard over. He's turning out of that roll a bit swifter there. And again, as he does another slight change in direction there, I'll put my bank back a little here to again give that a slightly snappier roll out. And as he comes round here and his path is straightening, we'll roll him back as well again. And that should take care of most of our path. I still haven't done the complete end there, but of course that's more to do with his landing. So we'll look at that as something completely separate. So what we get as a consequence of all this tweening is a nice balanced flight path where he really is, in control of himself, twisting and turning and rolling as he needs to. And we get something that starts to look, pretty decent there for a nice smooth playback type path. So again, in a way, it's very much like we did the car. We worry about this motion path first, and then we put the supplemental physics on top of it afterwards. And of course what we're going to do is grab all of these, frames whilst he's in flight here, make sure that they're all as TCB spline, and of course just give them any little teases or tweaks just as necessary here to, give them a bit more life, a bit more smoothness, a bit more of a rapid change, ease in, out. Deal with any kind of overshoots either by, trimming them down or indeed accentuating them if that's what we're after. Take care of funny little wobbles and consequently just, smooth out all of our rotation curves. There we go. Now after doing that, we should see that what we get is a really nice, dynamic motion in his flight there as he whirls himself around through the air, moving himself, turning himself. There we go, looking pretty sharp, I think. Good. Having gotten the body motion down then, it's time to go and work into the supporting body mechanics. Work our way into it all backwards. And that of course means working on the wings. Now, of course, as you saw, we put this initial, spread here and this one little flap to illustrate how we're gonna, work the flapping action in. But before doing that, there's another aspect of the wings that I want to work on, and that's the fingers. You'll see, of course, that these, finger portions are still folded. I haven't worked on those at all so far. The reason I want to work on those is because, of course, one of the main things that we've got going on in his flight here is the way that he banks and turns. Creatures such as this don't have a rudder like an aeroplane, so they work their banks and turns like this by, tipping and altering their wing. And the simple way of doing that is to create more lift on one side and less on the next, and that of course turns you over. And so in doing that, we will sort of spread and shrink the fingers a little bit to help define the wing aspect at different points in the turn. So first of all, let's just look at this bit whilst he's, doing this initial drop and popping his wings out there, and somewhere around here, just as he begins to unfurl them, I'm going to take these base finger controllers on both sides, of course, and I'll key them off there. Then, as we get out to here, we get out to the fully unfurled wing. I'll, put a little overlap in, so that's where he unfurls fully. So I'll say 1, 2, perhaps 3 frames after that. I'll key them again, and this is the point where I'll start opening up the wing like this. Do that on both sides there to begin, stretching his wing vein out and giving it some shape like this. We'll aim to get it at this point broadly symmetrical. So there we go, that's nice, that's his first unfurling there. Now then, let's follow him along and watch as he does all of his twists and turns. Right, there's his first turn coming off. So what we want to do for that, to produce it, find the point at which he's into the turn, so that's around here, just coming into the turn. I'll grab all of these base finger controllers and have them keyed there, so that's the point at which I will have rearranged them. So let's go, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 before that point, and we'll put a key there, so this is the point at which they will have already shaped. We'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 before that, let's say, and put a key there, so that's sort of their hold frame. So at this second frame, we'll just sort of, fold this wing on the inside of his turn back in a little like this, and we'll also grab all three of those, sort of let them turn out slightly, so that raises the wing vane on that side there. Then over on his right side, we'll make sure he's got a nice big spread of his wing there, and we'll take those three controllers and we'll dip them slightly like this. So that offsets the wing shapes against one another and causes his turn to roll like that. Now we see, of course, he's coming back for that turn round again. So we'll find where he just starts to hit the, crux of that, and we're going to say that we want the wing aspect to be shifted just after he's started rolling into that, so somewhere around 2, 3, 3, I guess, maybe 2, 3, 4. We'll key off the finger controllers there like that, and let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames sooner is where we'll put their hold key. And what I'm then going to do is have them selected all again, so that's where he starts to roll. And then by this point, so I'll keep them held in whatever that roll is for, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames, and another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames. I want to sort of reset them, so that'll be, what's that? That's frame 246. So we were sort of at the reset, middle pose here. So I'm just going to take that frame and essentially copy it to 246 like that. So at this point we want to do a little bit of a flick reversal, so this side can pitch up slightly like that, and I'll also bring the aspect in, so tightening that wing there, whilst this one will go flaps down, and we'll also broaden it like this to give him more, actual air contact, more wing surface in contact with the air, bring him up a bit more lift here. So there we go, creating a little scoop on that wing. And we said that this pose was going to be held on those fingers before that 246 pose that we copied in from previously. So we'll take this again, and we said we were going to hold it for, what was it, 6 frames, I think. So let's key again at 240. And there we go, we've got that, contracting and pushing around of his wing shape as he comes through his turns like this. Quite subtle, but once, of course, you've got the flap action and everything else working in, it'll be much nicer little addition to the whole thing. Do you have to do this first? Could you do the flap action first? Honestly, yes, you could really do it pretty much either way. But since I've got the wings more or less, just stable and held solidly throughout this entire move, I'm opting to do this part of it first, just as it gives me a slightly clearer view. You can actually see, of course, here for my own part, I've sort of got the actual main IK pose for the wing hole sort of a little asymmetrized at one point, which is the bit where he's done the push flap down. And really, just to help myself, I will just clean that one frame there up, so as I've got a a consistent pose across both wings throughout his flight for the moment, whilst I am just working on the fingers here. There we go. Having that does put us in slightly better stead for seeing what we're doing with these fingers. So as we come out of that, and you can see that having reposed that arm, that wing, the obviousness of what I'm doing with the fingers is somewhat clearer now. So as we come out of that roll, just nice and gently here, I'm going to reflex this side down. Whilst these guys over here I'll bring back up slightly again, as well as just tucking them in a little bit like this. Shift his wing aspect slightly. And then of course as he comes hard into the turn here, he's sort of flying flat on his side. So I don't need so much of a difference between the two wings. And so what I'm going to do is just grab all 6 of those finger base controls, and I'm just going to reset their rotations to 0 at this point. And that gives us a nice sweeping, swooping shape coming in here as he sort of catches the air. You see both wings just sort of pop open that little bit and hold nice and flat for him to catch that turn like that. Then following out, as he's really coming round the turn here, I'm going to grab the fingers here on his right side. I'm not going to bunch them together, but I am going to push them down like this. So we're getting this real push back against the air on that wing and this real ride up over it on that one. I might also extend out the vane here just a little. Again, just shaping the wings off against one another there in the capturing of his turn. Shortly after which, of course, he comes to do this roll back. And so what we want to do is manipulate the fingers there as well. So just before he starts to roll is where we need them to begin moving. Obviously, the aerodynamic of the wing has to be in place first, and then as that shape takes form, the airflow over the wing changes, and that is, of course, what causes his entire body to shift in the air. So again, this is kind of an anticipation action. The action needs to happen on the wing before the action happens in the body. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And there he's just, of course, his body is beginning to roll. What I'm going to do is bring them down on this side, open them up something like this, create a bit of shaping there. So he's using that inner wing to catch more air and flip his body, whilst this outer wing will be trying to catch more air on its top side. Therefore do a little bit of air braking on that one side like that. And there we go, we get the flip of the wings as he turns out there. And there we have this little pinch and flip of the wings as he begins to roll out. And of course, as he does roll out, so let's say another, what's that going to be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames, perhaps 7, 8. Take all of the fingers and let's just reset them back to 0 here, because of course he needs to not keep rolling, but catch himself and, you know, keep himself nice and flat. And so there you can see, very subtle, but you see how his wings just pinch off and pop out as he goes through that roll. It's very gentle, it's almost blink and you miss it, but when you do see it in playback there, it is visible and it does look quite nice, natural, just as we've got the action. There we go. You really get the sense of that anticipation movement in his wings, which is correcting his flight path. And so we just pop a little fast forward in to see the completion of that. Notice he does just a tiny little roll there, so we've got again a very, very subtle little tweak on the wings there. But then, of course, you see that he comes to do this big rise, and so we have another little tweak where you'll notice that both wings extend out, pitch down ever so slightly, so we pitch the fingers and we really spread them to, you know, give maximum wing aspect, maximum lift, so minimum wing loading, of course, to try and get him on that fast lift up to the top. And then just as he peaks, those fingers start to reverse and flex back the other way, so acting like a bit of a wind brake, almost an air brake, which of course slows him down for the dive bomb. And as he comes into that, we start to fold and tuck the wings there so as he can accelerate downwards under the force of gravity. There will then, of course, you know, be wanting to open them out, probably around this point as he comes into land, like something of a parachute to catch himself. but we'll look at that when we come on to the landing, as that is much more part of the landing mechanic than it is this main flight sequence. So what we see, we have consequently, if we come back and go through the whole thing, we have his wings flapping open, he starts to shift them to make this first turn, comes around, we can see them adjust again as he pulls himself level, open up as he comes into his big turn here, holds that steady, gives them a little flick to pull himself out of it, rolls along, up, big lift, grab and drop. So we see that we've got this really nice action taking place on the actual wing vanes throughout his flight that give that little bit of detail into the mechanic of how he's, holding, grabbing and working the airflow across his wing to produce his flight there. Or at least the shape of his flight, I should say. The rest of it then is of course going to be posing the wing wholesale, so using the IK goals to produce flap and of course, bringing his wings in via his arms and of course out via his arms, so adding a little more accentuation to what we've already done in terms of the finger action. The pattern then, or cycle for flapping the wings is, pretty straightforward. As we see, he makes this forward stroke, rolls back and comes forward again, like this. He's largely just rowing. It's very similar, of course, to the butterfly swimming stroke that you get. And so what we really just have here is this repeated cycle of action. In keying this up, you can see that I've got this camera here, which I've actually just parented to the root. That just makes it easy to get a nice clean view on the wings here to help me key them and keep them nicely synced. As for the keys themselves, you can see this little pattern of keys that I've got here. This is a single flap action, so that's back, forwards, rolling under, back, up, and back to the top again. And so you can see that I've just copied and pasted these keys for the wings there just to repeat them. And as for how it looks from the front, and we have the camera here at the front, then we can see that as it comes forward, it's coming down and it's rolling under and back. So the arms or the wings are rolling around like this. And that we see here in perspective view, up, over, forward and down in this simple flapping action taking place there. The other thing to notice with this is that of course I've once again worked it into the timing of how he is flying. So what we saw a while back there, he makes his first sort of lift stroke here just as he hits that lift point and goes straight into another one and continues that there. He makes a final stroke as he comes into his hard turn here, and then notice that I've let the wings sort of hang and they drift ever so slightly as he comes around before making a flap as he goes into this hard turn there. What we then get is of course he comes along this straight during which he's descending and he makes a flap here, but if we notice the actual keyframes on the wings, notice what I've done is I've spaced them out so he produces a slower flap through this portion because of course he is indeed falling, or at least falling ever so slightly and gently there. But then of course note the sequence of two flaps afterwards, which is where he's coming to produce his lift to rise over that last building before zooming in on the park. And what you see is that I've compressed the frames together to speed that up, so he does 1 and a second just going off screen there. There we are, 2, so let's see them. The slow flap and then 1, 2 very fast powerful flaps to lift him over that building there. What we see when we play this back from, let's say, this angle, is we get this very nice pattern of action going on in his wings, gliding round the corner there, then into that slow little flap, and then the 2 power strokes to get him over that building. Again, if we view him in perspective here, we can see him coming round, working his wings to hold him through his moves, flapping out of that, slow through there, couple of power strokes up, over, and of course the rest we are going to work into our landing section there. Of course, these are linearized, so at the minute they're a little choppy looking. So what we simply do is to take our IK goals and we'll finally turn all of them to TCB, at least for this whole, section of the animation here. And then of course we, work and tweak our curves as per normal to clean up any little lumps or bumps or, too strong overshoots. And of course doing this on the, different position channels where our wings are keyed, as well as of course rotation channels which we will have keyed to angle and flex the main outer vein of the wing as he takes each stroke. So as of course he scoops air on his downstroke, angling his wing into his forward movement to give him that, push of lift. And so once all of those are cleaned up, we see that the flapping action is a lot more slick and smooth, and it's starting to look a good deal more natural now for tying in with all of his motion. You can of course see it there, just looking at it straight from his front position, so we see the up and down, and it looks really, really quite nice. And we're getting a good deal of decent looking action coming in. Now, this is the point where we wind up with certain interesting considerations to start making about our motion. First of all, there's the specific detailed action of each wing itself. Obviously, we've put little bits and pieces already on the fingers, the spread and, tilt of each vein to, keep him working with his different twists and turns and whatnot. But we also want to work those details into how he's posing each arm, each overall wing. So even though we've got this nice, simple flapping action going on with the IK goals, what we really need to do is to offset the position and possibly rotation slightly of each IK goal to work into those little details of the turn, so as one wing is slightly raised above the other or lowered below the other. Now, of course, this is very tricky to do whilst we've also got this flapping action to go on. As I said, these frames, I just keyed the cycle once and then copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, and of course just shoved a little couple of timings around. Nothing particularly special there. And so we could go in and make those, particular adjustments at particular keyframes on each wing, on each IK goal. And that would certainly work, but it does create a bit more interference for us. It's extra detail to have to work and massage, and you sort of have this doubled up motion going on where you've got this nice repetitive motion taking place, but it also falls constantly out of balance. As such, we're going to take a slightly different approach to doing it, and that is to use offset items. Offset items are something of a, rigging topic. It's a controller. You've either got it in the rig or you haven't. And so far, through all of the different, pieces that we've worked on, we haven't dealt with rigs with offset items. We've sort of kept that to the side, if you will, as it is something of a, rig control issue as opposed to a specific animation issue. But this is one example where it really does come in useful to have such controls, and where it is going to be easiest for us to make use of them. So if we pop into our scene editor here, and we just look under the IK controls, that we can see that for each arm IK goal, there is an arm IK goal offset. At the minute they're locked and hidden, so let's unlock them and show them, of course do them for each arm here. Because this offset item is an immediate child of the IK goal and part of the IK goal's, internal hierarchy, and because it has no keyframes currently, it lets us work with something of a rudimentary animation layer. So you'll see, of course, that we can offset the position of a wing like this somehow from its main IK goal, and of course that offset will go across the entire animation like this. But of course it can itself be animated. So that quite simply is how we're going to deal with these, little details here. So of course we were wanting to flick this wing, somewhat down more on this stroke. So when we come to this first stroke, as he, turns the corner there, what we'll do is we'll come out to, let's say, this point here, create a key for that, and as it comes into the max down there, we'll just lift it up slightly so it's not coming as far down, therefore not punching out quite as much lift, and we'll also rotate it back slightly just there and give it a little tip down here. So that creates this little undercut on that first turn there. And of course you can see what we wind up with as he comes into the turn here. It's this sort of, sidelined offset shape into his wing. So as he begins to pull out of that turn, we'll just hold it there, and somewhere around here you see now his arm is over pulling. So at that state, let's just reset it on, position and rotation there. So that gives us one little flick over. There it's pretty good as is. However, as he comes into this hard turn, we want him to push a little harder with this wing. So let's find it where it's getting ready to come up, which is somewhere around here. We'll go along, come up to its high point there, at which point we'll just bring it out a little higher still, like this. And as he brings it into his downstroke, which occurs here, we'll push it down that little bit harder. Also just give it a bit more rotation there, like this. Check around and just angle it off some more as well there. And so you can see the way that the wing is shaping out as he, catches into the turn. It's a little overplayed by this point, so we can just start to, pull it back out again, so it's not quite so harsh. The wing isn't as collapsed, but you see, of course, the asymmetry that we begin to create there. And I think after about 12 frames, so half a second, perhaps even a little longer, because of course his wings are out during this period, we can slowly reset it back to its normal position like this. Then of course we have him producing this little flap here as he turns, and so as he rolls round, let us key it here, and as he comes making his roll, we can overshoot it slightly, so of course that partially air brakes him on that side, causing his hold to straighten out. And as we come back to here, we'll just reset that back to normal again. So that wing has a little bit of an under-rolling stroke to it. In fact, we can possibly just tease it up at that point to give it a good sort of counter action as it comes back, bringing it back to square here. So let's watch and see how that actually looks from the camera perspective there. We can see that we're building the asymmetry a little bit here and there on that one side, which is quite nice. Yep, all of that seems to be looking pretty decent. And so we'll go, of course, and add some asymmetry over to the other side as well. In this case, we'll push it up on this turn. So, of course, we're coming out of the drop and into the first turn here. I'll key it in place at that point. As he comes right into the turn there, and he's at his high, I'll push that wing off this way somewhat. So of course that asymmetrizes out that wing there. And of course as he comes into his downstroke, which reaches its maximum around there, we'll reset him back down again. But we'll also pop a little rotation onto the wing at that point in the downstroke. So again we get this asymmetry to cause him to turn and roll. That whole roll is starting to reverse by around this point here, so we'll key it there, and then as he comes flipping straight, which is approximately here, we'll have made that reset back to its normal rotation state. Then of course we're coming into his hard piece of cornering, so as he does that, we'll keep it held just at the top of the stroke there. And as he comes round like this, obviously the other one was pushing down somewhat, pushing down more to push him that way, and so we want this one to come out somewhat, of course giving him less resistance on that side, so of course he's rolling to that side. We can just offset turn that a little bit this way. So you see how that wing sort of leads itself in, and as we come out to the mid-roll there, we'll reset it rotationally and also positionally. So we get this nice grab of the air right as he comes into that corner. See the asymmetrical grab that he does with his wings, pulling himself into that there turn. Looks really nice. So as he comes out of the turn, he needs to roll his body again. So what we want to do is, of course, he has that upheld point there, and he's going to want to push down more with this wing. So we'll just key it there, and as his downstroke comes in to about there-ish, we'll give it a little overplay. We'll just push it down harder like this. So there he is, pushing, more with that wing to try and turn and correct himself, and we'll just put a little bit of extra turn into it like that to really make him try and catch the air to turn himself. Of course, pushing his body up on that side. And by the time we come up to this next high there, it has, of course, returned to where it should be. So again, we get this other asymmetrical catch working nicely there, which we can see the force of the wing really does now appear to be what pushes his body and shifts him, causing him to reorient like that. After that point, of course, he's largely just flying straight. There's a little dip that he does there, and we can perhaps just accentuate that slightly with a little asymmetry. So perhaps just grab it here, key it off. As he comes down there, we can lift that just a little bit higher than normal and possibly just roll it off ever so slightly as well, like that. Give that sense. Of course, as he's bringing that back into his slow flap here, it will have reset back to normal. So there we have that, and then of course he's into his hard fast flaps and the final rollover, that final building. So now if we see the whole thing playing back, what we should see is that we get some really nice, look at that lovely asymmetrical shaping taking place on these wings as he works his way through the air there. Let's just watch that again from this sort of angle. You can see him going there, a little bit off there, rolling over there, wonderful little flap out. Makes sense, of course, just to check off each stage. So there's that initial flap there. What I think I can do is, I might have missed a slight trick here, that can roll a little more. So we'll say that there it holds. Coming here, yeah, that's the good old downstroke there, and just flatten a little bit by that point, not a huge amount. There we go, makes that a little more gentle. See as he comes around here, yeah, we get a little dip, of course, the asymmetry working through our two sides here, which of course makes him roll around, coming there, holding his turn. Coming into the hard turn now, we get this lovely little, look at that wonderful shaping that we get across the two wings as he comes round and makes that turn. And of course it's the back upstroke here that helps stop him, continuing to fly in that same direction, helps him turn as well. Going into the glide through, and then of course the wonderful little asymmetrical flap that we get in at this point as well, where we can see his wings really rolled against one another, catching the air with a differential, causing him to pull back around. And yes, overall I would say that we can be pretty happy with this appearance and how well he seems to be flapping and working himself through the air there. So I do like that a lot. Of course, we take these offsets and get into good old TCB splining them, just as we have with the other parts, to smooth everything out. Not many keys, so it's all pretty simple to deal with. And of course, many of these overshoots, which are long holds between frames, those can be flattened out entirely. And of course, an easy way to do that will be to use something like the quick clean in the animation toolbox. We can apply that when it's done, so that will have flattened all of the holds. Of course, we can always go back and take a close look through, and perhaps some of these holds there could actually be softened off ever so slightly, just to give a little gentle overshoot taking place. It's perhaps not appropriate at every point, because some of these are quite long holds, but you know, maybe even then just a tiny little bit of drift helps to, you know, add just another little level of tiny variance and nuance into our animation. And certainly as long as it's not wildly swinging out, you know, it doesn't really hurt too much to have tiny little adjustments like that occurring here and there. In fact, if anything, I think, you know, it probably does add just that little bit extra life to what's going on in the wings. Subtle enough that it doesn't look wrong, but also subtle enough that it does give an extra little piece of movement that helps to pretty things up. So how's he look then if we watch him through? There we go, flap, flap. He's looking very sweet, I think. There's a lot of life, a lot of smoothness, subtlety and nuance now going on in those wing motions. We also have another place in this character where we can make use of an offset item for animation, and that's on his main root. So if we unlock and let us see that item there so that we're able to pick it and control it, we can see the way that this works. Basically, it's just an immediate child of his main root before everything else in the rig. And so that allows us to manipulate, you know, the rig from here. However, notice of course that the IK goals don't come with it the same way they do with the main root. Now that's because when, you know, the constraint was put on to constrain the whole IK system to the root on and off, it was constrained to the main root itself and not the main root offset. Now, again, this is one of those aspects of rig that you can play around with for yourself. You can notice where the IK controls match to item is. It is a child, of course, of the main root. You could make it a child of the main root offset, and then the IK goals would follow with that. And you'll notice that it gives you a slightly different style of animation. For this example, though, I'm going to leave it as it is, and we're just going to animate the main root offset directly, leaving the IK goals behind. And what we're going to do with this is to perturb his flight path ever so slightly, because of course at the minute his route travels nice and smoothly down this flight path. What I want to do is I want to bounce his body up and down through the air as a function of his wings flapping. So it gives him that little sort of bump as he, you know, pushes down, generating lift, and this little drop as he goes on the backstroke. So let's see how we're going to do this. Quite simply, we're going to wait for his first downstroke here, so that's around there-ish. I'm going to grab the move handle for the root offset here. We'll key it at that point, and 1, 2, 3, 4, as he comes down, let's say 5 there on the wing flap down. I'm going to push his body up a little bit. Now you can see, leaving the goals behind, why it might be advantageous to have the goals constraining to the root offset or not. In this case, I'm going to say not, and of course the effect that that has is leaving the IK goals behind. It gives that added little bit of accentuation and power to the down thrust. Then as we come back here and we come to the up, which is maxing out around there somewhere, we'll grab that and we'll push it down ever so slightly below the main root. What I will do is work a little hold in, so I'm going to say that it'll, you know, sort of hold itself up for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 frames perhaps, so that would be 183, so let's key that 183. And we'll also say that he falls to that down a little more swiftly, so he'll have hit the down probably somewhere around here, 193. So let's take that and copy that key there at 193. And then all we simply do is just hold him there for a moment until he comes to his next down, or the next moment before his downstroke. Then again, 5 frames after, pull him up a little bit so his body's taken a bit of a bounce out of that action of the wings there. Let's see at what point he's going to hit that next up. It'd be about, let's see, the wings come down, so I'd say probably about here-ish, so I'll just key it there. And what I'll do is I'll hold it for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we'll let him drop over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's where he'll produce the drop, just here. and he'll hold that until this point, so that's 233, so go there and rekey that at 233. To see how this is working, obviously if we just stay centered on this then it tracks with, but let's just jump to the main route itself, and what we should see is that there you have this little lift and push on the body. You see how much more life that's giving his flight action here. We really see it starting to bob around in the air. Look at that, just coming through there as he lifts up and his whole body shifts ever so slightly against the force of those wings, pushing him through and giving him lift. And so with that completed, you can see here the little bounce that he gets each time he takes a flap in the body through the whole flight path. It really adds a bit of extra naturalism to it. And notice of course that we also time and space and accentuate it for strength differently depending upon the flaps he's taking. So here, you know, it's sort of medium, and there it's sort of strong, but in that little flap it's slower, but in these big ones it's much harder and you get this greater displacement of the body. And of course what you can do is see very clearly the, you know, little lumps that creates in the motion path as he bounces up and down from the action of his wings flapping. Not easy to see, I know, whilst he's in motion, but if we just come back here then you can see that the motion path that he's taking through space is ever so slightly perturbed with these little up-down bounces as his body begins to fall and he catches it again and catches it again and catches it again. So you've got this sort of overlap between his projectile motion, if you will, that's on the main route, and this, you know, undulating bounce motion that's taking place there on his actual main route offset. Again, if we just have a look from our chase camera, we should hopefully be able to see some more detail of that. And yeah, we really do. We get a much better sense there of him really pushing against the air with his wings and how it really moves his body in the air. Of course, it looks a little clunky right there, but at the minute I'm still on linear keys. But when we go and, you know, TCB up the whole thing and obviously take care of some of these overshoots so as he doesn't, you know, go shooting too much, but give him a little bit of, you know, overthrow, tiny little bit of overlap, and also take care of these lumps that are occurring down here. In fact, that middle key there can just be gotten rid of. It doesn't seem to be that necessary, and we can tighten that up there, as well as of course take care of this long rollover from one position to the other, which is occurring during of course that, you know, 180 turn that he takes. And with all of that nice and spliny as well, we should see that this starts to look very natural indeed. Yeah, there we go, look at that, really bouncing through the air there on account of what his wings are doing. So you see that we're, you know, laying in the root motion on this guy first, getting the overall motion path of that down. But, you know, depending on what, you know, how his body is flying through the air, where it's twisting and turning and rising and falling, that dictates how we work in the wings. But then how fast and hard and, you know, so forth the wings are flapping has to feed back into the root and displace, you know, his actual position in space. So you've got this double overlap of forces working against one another, and these needs of anticipation and overlap. And so that's why for this character, this motion and this rig, having that offset item available on different parts is very useful. And you can see of course how it's allowed us to animate our character here. Once again then, we've been going on quite a while now for this video, so what we'll do is wrap this up at this stage since we've done a huge bulk of work here, and then we'll continue finalising out, you know, the last stages of this as well as the landing and everything else in the next video.